All right, so let's jump in to our final time together. Today we're talking about a fruitful life. We looked through the book section on receptivity, learning to hear God's voice. If you don't have a book, there's some in the back. They're free. But what does it mean to have a fruitful life? Just a reminder, God is not silent. The problem is often we're distracted, we're busy, unwilling to respond to what we actually are hearing. Those are things that can get in the way. And God speaks through His Spirit, just as we've been saying each week. Just a reminder, what we're describing is a relationship with God. This isn't magic words. It's not religion. It's literally learning to surrender your heart, your life, to follow Jesus. His Spirit comes to live within you, and His Spirit is what speaks to us. But it only happens when we fully surrender. And even if you're a follower of Jesus, you can start to veer off or wander away, and it's hard to hear His voice when our back is turned, right? So coming back to Him every day. I'm going to send you how to follow Jesus. Even if you've been walking with Jesus a long time or you're new to this, I'll send it to you in an email that'll help move forward. But so here's some of the ways we can hear God's voice. We looked at each one of these through our time together. Seeking God through prayer, seeking God through reading the Bible, and the Spirit of God. Those are the most important. These are the three most common ways. And the other ones can augment, can help, amplify signs, wise counsel, our circumstances, and then what makes us unique. And so we hit each of those throughout our time together. But I wanted to talk tonight about this whole idea of a fruitful life. And so the book that you've received has a bit of a story behind it. And so let me share it here on video. You said, before I move, I want you to write down everything you wished you knew when you left the house. Remember that? So I think you may have thought, maybe I'll write a letter or write, some bullet points. But instead, I wrote a book for you, the first copy. It's called Fruitful, Becoming the Person God Created You to Be. She knows it's a miracle because it's been 14 years since I wrote the first book. But I'm really excited to share that with you. It comes out August 29th, and it's been so hard not to tell you, and it's a real miracle it finally came out. Surprise. So she was about to move to Paris, and I was able to give that to her right before she left. But really, in many ways, when I was thinking about that, what do I wish I knew before I'd moved out of the house? I kind of had a chance to think about that. Her trip was delayed a year, and so in that year is when I started putting this together. But it was actually Matthew chapter 13. In my 20s, I read that parable, and it really became an important part of what's formed how I walk with Jesus. And so I want you to think for a moment of all the messages that Jesus has shared. He was in front of one of the largest crowds that he ever had. And what would you think he would talk about, right? Did he talk about justice for the poor or heaven and hell? No. He actually talked about what it would take to become the person God created you to be. And what does that look like? And so we're going to read from Matthew 13. And this is called the parable of the soils, or the sower. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Let me pause for a moment and remind you, Jesus would speak in parables for many reasons. One of them was because these stories are really easy to remember, and they carry spiritual truth. But there's also kind of it's like a, what is that called? The test that you look at the same picture and you might see it. Say it again? Rorschach test, right? I kept thinking of The Watchmen. What was that guy's name in The Watchmen? Uh, but yeah, Rorschach test, where basically you can hear the story and feel convicted, totally understand what's going on, or you can hear it and it doesn't make any sense, right? And it could just be where you're at spiritually, or it could be just your attitude, right? So then the disciples come to Jesus and they say, "What are you talking about?" And then he explains to them, listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling along on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. So the idea here is we have the capacity to become fruitful. Now remember, everything in the new kingdom is turned upside down. In the beginning of the story, Adam and Eve were told to go be fruitful and multiply. In the new kingdom, Jesus is saying, you don't have to be married to be fruitful. You can literally have lots and lots of spiritual children. You can actually, regardless of your knowledge or your accolades or your experience, you and I have the capacity to make an incredible difference in this new kingdom. And so what we have to do is learn from this. The first soil, the big struggle was it didn't hear, right? It got trampled on, and the enemy comes and snatches it up. So what's the opposite of being unreceptive? Well, it's to be receptive. It's to overcome a hardened heart. So we can say it on the positive side is if you have ears to hear, wrestle with God on the question, what is God calling for your life? That could be a big picture like, I'm called to be a ... Or it could be, I'm called to do this specific thing in this season. I'm not talking even just about career, but like helping someone or hosting someone or whatever he might be calling you to do. If not, how have you heard God's voice in the past? So you're trying to figure out, we talked about this throughout our time together. There are supernatural, external, and internal clues that God is giving us. Again, go back. You can go through the slides and take a look at these verses. But this one here in particular, Revelation 3:19, says that Jesus stands at the door and knocks. Jesus is a gentleman. He does not kick down the door of our heart. He knocks. He's there inviting us into relationship. He wants to soften our hardened hearts that we might hear him, right? So to be receptive means to move from having a hardened heart to a vulnerable heart. By the way, you've heard us at Gateway talk a lot about recovery. If you ever find yourself hurt or angry, a lot of times that may be because of the thing that the person did is actually reminding you of an unhealed trauma or hurt in the past, right? We have hardened hearts because people are jerks. People are mean, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally. But the key is not to put a brick wall around your heart to protect yourself, because when you do that, you become isolated. Instead, we got to learn to forgive. We got to learn to give people a second chance. We got to learn to have hard conversations. Some people are going around hurting people unaware, and those heart-to-hearts, like, hey, you may not know this, but can be a real beautiful place that moves us towards independence. All right? So that could be your struggle. that being receptive is the hard thing. Hearing God's voice is the hard thing. Others of you, you hear God's voice, and that's not been the trouble. You're more like the second soil. You get real excited about a lot of different things, only to then give up when things get hard, right? So if you're wrestling through the question, what is God calling me to do? And you know it. I'll give you an example. I'm trying to write my third book, all right? I write one book every decade. And so what I'm hoping to do is write this book. I feel called by God to write this book. But then if I answer this question, what has happened to you that keeps you from making progress? Whenever I sit down to write this book, suddenly I want to clean the house. Suddenly I want to get to inbox 0. Like there's so many other things I'd rather do. I am choosing not to do it. It's hard to sit down. I'm not an introspective person. It's hard for me to sit in a room and write. And so there are things I'm going to have to do to overcome that calling. Again, your calling could be a career. It could be a sense of calling to one day get married. It could be a sense of calling for something very specific right now. And then you're asking, okay, if I know what I'm supposed to do, what is keeping me from doing it? Which trial? Because the opposite of giving up easily is tenacity. And these are some great verses. To live a life worthy of the calling that you've received is what it talks about. In Thessalonica, they were being persecuted. So how do we live a life worthy of the calling we've received? Well, we can't without God's help, right? Without the Spirit. So, if we're honest, sometimes we can have a shallow faith. And so the alternative is to have a deep faith, something that overcomes the trials in our life. All right, number 3. Maybe your struggle is not being unreceptive. Maybe it's not giving up when things get hard. Maybe your struggle is temptation. What are the choices that you're making that are keeping you from making progress to live out your calling? What temptations seem to distract you from your calling? And if you're not sure, consider being more introspective. Ask others, and there's assessments that you can take that will help you with this. Here's some great passages of Scripture. I'm just going to tell you this story from Titus. In Titus chapter 1, it says, Titus, I left you in Crete. Crete is a real place, an island in Greece. And he says, I've left you in Crete to go and appoint elders, which means overseers, people who are spiritually mature. And then he says in verse 11 and 12, or verse 12, he says, and I know that even their own prophets say that the Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, and lazy gluttons. And then one of the funniest verses in the Bible, he says, and this saying is true. I was on a tour through Greece, and I was kind of the pastor of the tour. And so to read that passage in front of the Cretan driving the bus and the Cretan tour guide, they did not think that was nearly as funny. But have you heard the word Cretan used in a positive way? No. Have you heard the word used in a negative way? It's a word that's just kind of through the years, perhaps because of that verse. That does not mean all Cretans are that way. I think Paul might have been saying that with a wink. But what he was saying is, Titus, your job is going to be really hard. You have to help people who are known for being liars, brutes, and gluttons become spiritually mature enough to oversee others. And then there's this amazing passage in chapter 2. It says that it's God's grace that helps us say no to ungodliness. It's when we are more aware of the greatness of God, we have a holy fear of God, we're aware of His love, that we don't want to fall into those temptations, and we rely on Him to help us through those temptations. But we cannot do this ourselves. We're not supposed to just muster up the strength to do it. We're supposed to die to self and let the Spirit of God help us, let community help us. And so, what are those temptations that are keeping you from being distracted? So one of the things I'm trying to do as I'm trying to write this book, which, by the way, there's a guy that started coming to our church, and guess what his job is? He's a literary agent. So we had lunch on Wednesday. Oh, what is your job? I'm a literary agent. Oh, I'm writing a book. So maybe he'll help me. We'll see. But I have to, I am distracted by my phone. I don't know about you. And so I don't look at the news until I'm done with work for the day. That's just a discipline I'm trying for a while. I try not to look at social media throughout the day. Like this is like when I'm not working, when I'm off, but also when I'm off, trying not to be distracted at home either. So it kind of limits my time, which is probably better. But there are things that I have to think through. What keeps distracting me? Being busy can be a distraction from what God is calling me to do. Sometimes it's good things. Man, you should see my yard. It's never looked better because I have a deadline for my book, right? And so learning, okay, what are the things that keep distracting me, and overcoming that. So what are your temptations? The isolation category, if we're not careful, thorny is the path. So there's the distractions of wealth and worries of this world. I love Gertrude's story she shared earlier. Such an honest, if we're not careful, we can be overwhelmed with what's going on in the news. We will be overwhelmed with what's going on in the news. It's way more than we could ever handle. And she gave a beautiful example of, okay, what do you do when you're anxious? Well, you turn to God. Open the scriptures, let him speak to you. And the way he spoke so clearly, so beautiful. But the opposite of isolation is to move towards independence is finding clarity. When you're surrounded by the thorns and the chaos, you kind of break through that to instead choose clarity. And then the fourth soil. This is the good soil. This is the one where if you have the right environments in place. I don't know if you've ever grown a tree or you're good with growing plants. You can't make it grow. You can create the environment so that it will grow. You have the right soil, give it some water, make sure it has some sun. It will naturally grow. Organic things grow when it's in the right environment. Some of us have to move out of certain environments that are dark into environments that are light. So in this category, it says the good soil is the one who hears the word and understands. And it's hard for us to get this, but in the Hebrew word, hear means obey. When you hear God, you obey. Because if you remember it was you were a kid, maybe your parents said, "You're not listening to me." You probably heard the words they were saying, but you weren't doing what they were saying, so that's why they said, "You're not listening to me." When the people of the Jewish people heard God, that automatically implied obedience to God. That didn't mean they always followed through, but that's what the Hebrew word means. So when you hear God and you obey God, his voice becomes clearer and clearer, right? When you say no to that temptation, when you say yes to that invitation to be kind, to forgive, whatever it may be, you'll be amazed at how when we overcome rebellion and we do what we know we ought to do, it actually helps us make progress. Here's where I would add to this, who can help you get there? And what sacrifices do you need to make to get there? Whatever that calling is, it might require some sacrifice. Do you guys ever watch The Biggest Loser? Did you ever watch that back in the day? Any of you know what I'm talking about? Okay, you guys are much younger than me. I used to watch that show while eating ice cream. And honestly, Deborah and I loved that show for years. But what was always bothering me is they would say things like, "It's time for me to make myself the priority." But if you watched their lives, they were really more self-disciplined, more self-control. Like they were actually no longer making yourself the priority. Another way to say it is, it's time for me to make the sacrifices necessary to get healthy, right? Because when I make myself the priority, I'm selfish. I eat more. And so I know what they meant in spirit. Because if you watch what they did, they had to sacrifice time away from family, what they ate, all the exercise. And there's a new documentary coming on that a lot of how they did this was not good, But I remember watching it and certainly being inspired by it because it reminded me of like, you know what? You cannot expect to experience the fullness of God's promise in your life if you're not willing to also sacrifice for it. What are you willing to give up? Sometimes that could be those temptations. That could be those struggles. It could be some of those relationships. It could be where you work. There's things when you start to know God is not wanting me to do this or to be here, acting on that. All right. Genesis 11:31 through 12:1 is kind of fun because it says that Terah was on his way to Canaan. Anyone know what Canaan is also called? The Promised Land. Well, who's Terah? Terah is Abraham's dad. So literally, if you read in Genesis 11, it appears that Terah's dad was on his way to the Promised Land, stopped, and then God called Abraham, at the time his name was Abram, to come follow me. I will make you a new nation. I will bless you and bless all the world through you if you'll go to this new place, which was the same place his dad was headed. It makes me wonder if maybe his dad was on his way and stopped. One of my favorite quotes is by a business entrepreneur, a professor at Harvard. Her name is Rosabeth Moss Cantor, and she said, "Everything looks like failure in the middle." See, some of us are going through the middle right now. It could be in a relationship that actually is really meaningful, but it's just hard. It's easy to jump from friend group to friend group instead of working through things. It's easier to just quit. But what if the hardest thing, which might be to stay, is what will lead to that breakthrough? Kind of like what you were sharing, Victoria. Principal's not listening. It's an awful school year. You're praying, what should we do? God, what should I do? And the principal's gone. Okay, that works. If you had quit the week before the principal left, that would have been a bummer, right?
We all considered it.
We all considered it. So here's what you discover. The opposite of desolate is creative, all right? So, and this is where that influence comes in. So my hope is if you had a chance to take the Fruitful Life assessment, it's at the back of the book. If you didn't, again, get a book and you can go through it. But it'll show you, some of us are, when we've grown in this area, if you've learned to hear God's voice, you might be able to help other people hear God's voice. If you've overcome a lot of trials, you can actually become a guide helping others through their trials, similar to what we heard Bryce describe. If you've been able to overcome temptations and addictions, you might become a trailblazer, helping others get through the thorns, right? Become a sponsor or lead a group through 12 steps. If you have learned to be obedient, to do the right things, even when no one is looking, to not avoid doing, sometimes there's the sin of disobedience, but there's also the sin of not doing what you know you should, being creative instead. You can become a catalyst, helping others become more fruitful in their life as well. So these are just another kind of assessment that could help you figure out what's the best way for me to make an impact in the lives of other people. All right. So next steps for next week. If you haven't read through all of Matthew 13 recently, I highly encourage you. And when you do, read it and ask God, okay, which one of these is most like me? Which one of these categories is where I struggle the most? And then consider those questions that I brought up. What is my calling? And what are the trials that are keeping me from fulfilling my calling? What are the temptations that are getting in the way of living out my calling? And what do I need to sacrifice to get there? Another to do, serve others with others, right? One of the best things to do in my 20s that helped me grow is helping teenagers grow. I may have been young in my faith, but man, I was definitely ahead of those teenagers, right? And so maybe for some of you, I know some of you have jumped in and you're helping with the kids, or you're helping with the tweens, or you're helping with the teens. If not, that could be a great next step for you. Or coming and serving as a greeter, or being a part of some of the teams that serve in the city. Join a group. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have our concert. Connor Shaheen will be leading us. By the way, there's some posters on your tables for you to take to work or to your apartment complex. Invite some others to come. There'll be some sheets going around that you can sign up. Say, yes, I'm coming, and put me on the setup team, or I'll help with the being a waiter. We're just going to make this kind of a fun night where we're serving coffees and serving desserts. It'll be a great time together. So sign up for that, and then join a group. 20s and 30s, 18 to 25 singles will be reconvening in 3 weeks in the student room, going through a new series called Practicing the Way. I highly recommend it. John Mark Comer, one of my favorite authors, describes some of the ways that you can connect with God. Solitude, Sabbath, serving. You'll hear some really great opportunities for that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump into our groups. We got Garrett here helping with this table, Jim right there, this table here with 20s and 30s, singles here, and co-ed, all ages. But here's some of the questions, and you can use the assessment to help with this. Which of the following is your best skill and why? Which of the following is the hardest for you and why? And then after a few minutes, we'll switch over to what do you sense God has been saying to you throughout this series, and what are the next steps you hope to take in terms of serving or connecting or growing. All right, ready, break.